First of all, a couple of logistics. If you haven't signed a video release as a guest, not a Rutgers member of the faculty, please do so. As of now, it's only to be used by Rutgers, and so it's not a big problem, I hope. Carol, back to CLE person has those sign-ups as well. I guess that's really the only one, except Carol is there for CLA credit. If you want CLA credit, sign up to that. So, first of all, this has been already a great 1.5 days with our speaker, Judith Wegner. And I anticipate, too, that you will learn from and enjoy her presentation today. I participated in a presentation at Drexel yesterday, and I can assure you, you will not be disappointed if a continued interest in the health of the profession is yours. And I cannot imagine anyone here who does not have that desire. And first of all, how is Professor Wegner here? Where is our Chancellor, Phoebe? Thank you so much. Phoebe and Judith go back in the legal dean's days or something like that, yes. Law professor.
Many years. Thank you so much, Judith.
Thank you.
I
have to say, you folks are so happy and lucky to have Phoebe here. She's one of the all-time greats. So, Phoebe, I wish I were under your jurisdiction.
That was a plan. Thank you.
As a former colleague at Temple Law School and a member of the board of Hilltop with Phoebe, I couldn't agree more. As most of you likely know, probably all of you, because I sent you an essay, I have billed this event as a goodbye to the law school and a thank you. But bringing Judith to Rutgers was a several years dream, going back to discussions with Ray about setting up an ethics center at the time when we had just won the Rutgers to Rowan divestiture fight. As it had happened with other centers, Ray said, first, let's do some speakers. And my first targeted speaker was this woman, Judith Wegner. With all that happened in the past 2 years, both at the law school and with me, and actually Judith, it ended up having to be postponed until now. And so when my situation clarified, I decided to take the opportunity to thank you, all of you, with this lecture brought to you by a foundation, the Shelter Foundation. Why the thanks to you? You know why, but I'm going to say it again. In high school, actually in grade school and high school, I had a math teacher who drove the bus for me when I was in 2nd and 3rd grade, taught me shop in 7th grade, and trigonometry in senior year. And I knew I wanted to be like Kevin Matz. I wanted to be a teacher. When I decided to go to law school 6 years later, I went with the attitude that I would either teach or practice law in the public interest. But the ether of law school took over for me. And this is, I think, part of the subject that Judith will be talking about. I was not the kind of strong character who knew his goals so clearly that he would stick to them. A clerkship and 2 years at a law firm turned into 40 years. But with good fortune, for the last 15 of those 40, I only had to hold fast to my 1.6 ethic rule confidentiality obligations to receive my yearly stipend. Confucius said, find a job you love and you will never have to work another day in your life. Litigating at a big firm for 25 years, one learns what work is. But for the past 20 years, I have found jobs I love. And now, having emptied my office and hung up my teaching saddle, at least for the present I hope, I am working at the Public Interest Law Center, fulfilling my second entry to law school dream. I thank you all who have come, my colleagues in the academy, my colleagues at the bar, the partners from my firm, my former students who have honored me by coming, to a friend who I knew from childhood who became president of the Berks County Bar, and to his wife who became a very good friend in law school, to my tennis playing friend who became a big firm senior partner and chancellor of the Philadelphia Bar, to my current professional ethics colleague and a past president of the Pennsylvania Bar, and to all of the wonderful staff who supported this event and who have supported me over the years. Our professors for this event, Rick, Katie, and John, our acting dean, and then our staff, Kathy Donovan, Mel Gordon, Celia, Debbie Lee, Carol Shaner, and Andrew Rossman. I thank you. It has been a great run here, and I hope you remember two things. You, who are now teaching, have a sacred job, sculpting young minds. You have another job that many would die for. That sacred job is also the gift of the opportunity to work with those young minds. A long thank you, and now a brief introduction. Judith Wegner is just the top of the national pyramid of legal educators. A former dean for a decade, a former president of the American Association of Law Schools, the principal researcher and an author for the Carnegie Report on legal education, a resume of quality articles and awards, and from working closely with her since last winter, a wonderfully responsible, able, and warm person with huge ability, dedication, and wisdom about educating and the law. She is the Burton Craig Professor at the University of North Carolina Law School and our speaker. But two fast items before we get there. Her topic today is not just the least developed in the legal profession. Professional identity is the least developed as of the 4 other Carnegie reports on 4 other professions: medicine, nursing, engineering, and clergy. The reports all find that to be the least developed professional identity. So I want to start with an example that I've observed as a lawyer on a professional bar association committee, where the question came up, a client goes on social media and starts beating up on his former lawyer. So at the Bar Association Committee, the question is, may the lawyer respond? Universal. 15 lawyers, no. Why not? It's waiver, isn't it? That's me. No. Confidentiality. That was without a look at the rules. Then our intellectual giant of the committee pulls out the rules, and it says that one has to have a claim. A rule says one has to have a claim against one. And clearly, the client is not making a claim. The commitment to confidentiality that shows is beyond just some lawyers learning some rules. It is in their guts. That is an example of what I call professional responsibility. And by the way, there's some case law that allows somebody to go to an agency before any claim is ever made. So they may not have been right on the law, or they may have been. The point is, it didn't matter. Confidentiality was in their guts. I present to you Judith Wegner. Please teach us about professional identity.
Thank you. Well, before I begin, I'd say let's give a round of applause for Donald Joseph, who's the founder of the feast here. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today. Donald has been such a prince throughout all this. I ended up having a couple bouts in the hospital last spring, including one just before I would have come here for serious surgery, and he said, no doubt, don't come, take care of yourself. So to me, that's pretty much an indication of putting the client, if I was the client, ahead of himself, because I know you may have wondered why I'm not here and gone by now, but that's the backstory. I really have appreciated very much meeting many of you walking around here, my dear friend Phoebe, your chancellor, Ray Solomon, who has had a chance to talk with me about some of his work on the profession, many others of you who I met this morning at the committee discussion about assessment. This is a different topic, as you can see on the slides, professional identity, what it is, why it matters, how it develops or can. Now, really going to proceed in three parts, not surprising giving the title in that order, what it is, why it matters, how it develops or can. The point I want to make here to begin with is, Donald said, and I had thought, should I come first to why it matters to you? And I'm going to do a brief detour on that as a preview of what's coming next. But I thought, no, really you need to understand kind of the evolution of this idea, what it means first, in order to really evaluate for yourselves, does it matter, and how we might approach it. So I thought this would be interesting to you as well to realize this is this coming Sunday's magazine cover for, if not cover, lead article for the New York Times Magazine, something I had been thinking about and preparing. The year we obsessed over identity. Pause a minute and think about, do you think people have obsessed about identity this year? You may not be able to see all those photos, so let me say to you, Caitlyn Jenner, who used to be on the Wheaties box when I was a kid, when she was an Olympic athlete. Bill Cosby, maybe closer to home, is who he seemed, really who he is, allegedly. Upside Down guy in the fourth row, recent Pixar movie I haven't seen, but about the emotional life of kids with different things pulling at them. Somewhere here, Rachel Donzel, you may remember over the summer a fair amount of debate about her role out in, I believe, Washington State, where she was selected as the president of the NAACP chapter, and then her parents said, what do you mean she's white? And then her life kind of unfolded from there, but she had identified for a long time and in pretty powerful ways about being culturally, or in her experience, felt that she was black in terms of what that experience might be. So think about that and think about the fact that identity is kind of on our minds. If you choose to read that this summer, read it online, it's quite interesting because it's not just the personality depicted there, but current music, current literature, art, a variety of other things that drives the point home that identity is often subsurface in some way, but it's really something that is pretty influential in how we see each other and how we experience our lives, as indicated by some of the folks who've come forth and said, I'm not really who I appear to be. Why is this important? Well, we're going to get to what it is, but why is it important? As you'll see when we go along here, I believe that, as other folks affiliated with Carnegie Studies have said, law schools are so-called trust institutions. That is, we have a sacred trust as to society. We also have one as fellow professionals. But whether we prepare people well and give them something to aspire to and understand about themselves and about their ethical obligations, there's nobody else in the universe around these folks more central to that development than we are as educators. I think it's powerful testimony to Donald's presence and commitment as a teacher that so many people who he has worked with or taught are here today, because clearly they see him as holding their futures at some point in his hand, and his being a good steward to help them know who they wanted to be as members of the profession. That's the kind of thing I think we really need to think about as we go about our day-to-day work, those of us who are academic lawyers. What is up there in terms of implications for that? Let me briefly preview this, and we'll have a chance to come back and discuss that. If we think that ethics is important, and we're all here today, many of us getting ethics credit, if that's important, which I hope is true. I talked to someone over on this side of the room coming in who talked about his frequent discussions with Donald now that he's in practice about the ethical dilemmas he sees. And I work in our clinic as well as in other settings and talk about ethics every course I teach. If ethics is important, how many think ethics is important? I'll close my eyes so if anybody's not raising them, I won't harass you. I want to talk about how ethics impacts professionalism, but professionalism as a sense of a broader universe about at least aspirations. That is tied to ethics, and then professional identity, I think, is tied to professionalism. So if you think about that, I'm going to depict it several times as a circle. Whether we work on professional identity, you might say ethics influences professionalism, influences professional identity, but I think it works the other way too. How people come out of law school, how they are in the classroom. I tell my students, any class I teach, every day I get up in the morning, I feel very blessed and lucky to be a lawyer. That's literally true. And I think many of you here probably could say the same thing, or else you wouldn't have kept doing what you're doing. And why is that? To me, it's because it gives me the tools to make the world a better place. And I get, as Donald, I get to share that with my students. What could be better than that? That's one point. Think about current market pressures. I was talking to Ray Solomon in the hall just now, who's done some very interesting historical work on professionalism and the profession. When commercial business-like reality hit the legal profession, with the Bates case having to do with advertising and other things like that, we really had some different dynamics come into play, and I think given the way the economy has panned out, there's even more of that now than ever. So if we've, and just a free, something you might get to play Jeopardy about. Once upon a time, Clark Kerr in California said, this is a daunting or frightening thing, the railroads were to the 18th century, no, to the 19th century, what the professions were in the 20th century. Well, now we're in the 21st century. I took the train up here so I could tell this joke, so I know what a railroad is. I hope you do too. Those from Reading, somebody's from Reading. Monopoly game, Reading Railroad, among other things. That's important because if we really value what it is to be a professional, if we don't pay attention to it, it's not going to be there for the next generation. Interesting information in the article that Donald distributed to you that I touch on but not go into in enormous detail. Interesting empirical research being done about whether those who have a stronger sense of professional identity, identified by their colleagues in the bar, for example, as excellent lawyers who receive honors, who are kind of prototypes of what we might aspire to be, they tend to be particularly effective as well as happier. And people, including Neil Hamilton, whose article I gave you, have been doing work on those students who really have a sense of themselves coming into the profession, not only as just good grade-making students as they've been before they open the door here, they may be happier. Part of the psychodepression affecting lawyers and affecting students may be that they don't have a holistic, integrated sense of themselves as lawyers. That's a powerful notion. And then my last one, which I really do think is very important, so go individuals, the experience they have. If they have some sense of professional identity, that can either build the strength of the bar as a collective, or if that's not there, it's like taking the power potential of the bar and dismantling it. So this is just to wind up on this slide for those of us who are lucky enough to teach, or those of us who are in practice and are involved in everything from mentoring to bar work to whatever, we are trustees, in effect, of the future. I say law schools, what's the point of law schools and universities, is to build a better future. So if we let down the team, we've let down our grandchildren. That's not something I want to do in my life. Okay, everybody ready to go? What is professional identity? Here's my diagram. Ethics requirements, professionalism, professional identity. I think in order to have this discussion, you probably want to know what these different terms mean and how they relate or don't relate to each other. I think you can see from my Venn diagram, I think there's overlapping implications here, but I do think that these terms, for clarity's sake, should be used differently. So for ethics, and this is for the bar CLE enforcers out there, I understand that either Pennsylvania or New Jersey requires me to draw incantations forth about the relevant ethics requirements. And somebody told me this, I don't know if it's true, but you're going to help me meet my ethical obligation here to get CLE credit. What are some of the ethical responsibilities of lawyers? Where do they come from, and what values do they reflect? So I won't call on you, but I appreciate volunteers, and I've been known to call on people. So who's going to give me one thing? What's an ethical responsibility to remember? Come on, somebody here. Yes.
Confidentiality.
Confidentiality, yay.
Thank you.
Okay, did you have thought to?
Oh, no
A little louder? No commingling of funds, so fiduciary as to money. Okay, who else?
Zealous representation.
Zealous representation, all right, yes.
Avoiding conflicts of interest.
Avoiding conflicts of interest.
Independence.
Independence. Yes.
Competence.
Competence, yes, that's number one. I just wrote an article about that. That's now in the, my friend Peter Glenn there, who's been on the accreditation committee with the ABA for quite a while. That's now a requirement for us to pay attention to competence in our graduates. And my article says, among other things, that includes ethics, not just skills. And second, that it's not clear what that means. Okay, who else? So, yes?
Candor to the tribunal.
Candor to the tribunal.
Well, I was going to say, that makes it difficult.
Okay, you want to expand on that?
I just found that
Because here's the client, here's the tribunal, life is messy, end of story, right? Okay. Anybody else? Yes? Helping the impaired? Well, you're right, there's an ethics requirement. In effect, that's, we have clients, they come in many shapes and sizes. Oh, impaired lawyers. Okay, so we have an obligation to others in the profession. Yes?
Pro bono service.
Of public service and pro bono service, and taking appointments when called upon. Anybody else? These are pretty good values, aren't they? Part of this piece I just wrote gave me a chance to go back and see where these ethics conceptions came from. Anybody, Ray probably knows the answer here, but anybody have an idea, where did these rules come from? From the mountaintop, right? Where'd they come from? Oh, look, the lady, if I had a prize, you would get it. I'm impressed. Okay. You want to tell them more about that? Or give them a citation later, sorry.
I know that during the mid-19th century post-Civil War period, there was a lot of academic and bar work on developing codes of ethics.
Right.
The Alabama Code was involved in the ABA
Right.
in the 19th century.
Right.
And it espoused to some extent, tripartite values of opportunity to client, the tribunal, and the bar that inform so much of our...
Let's give the lady a hand. Oh, she's embarrassed, but she should be proud. Interestingly enough, it was interesting to me, living in the South, this was Colonel Jones, who I think ultimately became a judge, so Judge Jones, but I think part of it, there's this real tradition about honor in the South that may have its good side and its bad side, but say we have a very potent honor code for my institution. I've worked with undergrads around that. So it may not surprise you that this would be in the aftermath of the Civil War, and it would be in some ways an effort to try to say, we lost, but there's honor amongst us, or something like that. That wouldn't surprise me at all. But there's also some prior work interesting to be up here. A noted lawyer from Baltimore and the dean of Penn Law School each had precursor statements. The first of those from the Baltimore lawyer was interesting because it was framed in terms of resolutions that he put forth for people, basically about deportment. So it's like, if you want to be recognized and seen as a gentleman lawyer, and it was gentleman at the time, be diligent, don't have conflicts. So some of it really is, in a way, what shall I say, designed to be operative in terms of fostering your reputation too. So it's an interesting thing to reflect on that. But I'd have to say, I think it reflects not only aspirations, which were separate in the earlier versions of, before we got to the model rules, when we had canons. Previously, there was more of a distinction between disciplinary rules and aspirational considerations. But I think if we went around the room, most of you, I think, would say, yes, these are important principles, and they kind of correlate with what we do day to day. Maybe the zealousness one is the one that I would say the students think most about, because that doesn't mean you're hired gun. That doesn't mean you can ignore your obligations to third parties and to the candor to the tribunal and things like that. But here we are. As you said, duties to clients, to the courts, to third parties, and to the profession, all of those are pretty central to us. So we know what ethics are, right? Okay, you qualify for ethics credit, but only 10 minutes worth at this point, so let's keep going. So we talked about ethics requirements. Next thing I want to touch on is professionalism. As I was talking with Ray Sullivan this morning, I think that really came into the conversation probably in the around 1990 or something around that time. There was a major ABA committee on professionalism. I had a very good friend from the med school, head of surgery, down my way, and we would have discussions about what was happening in the medical field and how they were talking about professionalism too. So I think it was something about what's bubbling up in society and kind of the rolling presence of the business model that was affecting different professions around that time. You probably all have heard of Roscoe Pound. Who's heard of Roscoe Pound? I'll close my eyes. Okay. He said a profession refers to a group pursuing a learned art as a common calling in the spirit of public service, no less than public service, because it may incidentally be a means of livelihood. I have to say I worry now if that balance is struck quite the same way. Pursuit of the learned art in the spirit of public service is the principal purpose. And in the 1986 ABA Commission on Professionalism, found that very interesting because they set out a slightly different set of logic, which to me is pretty compelling. In the context of the social compact, like today, the social compact between members of the profession and those they serve in the society that lets them not be overregulated by somebody else. First thing is we have skill. We've been taught, we've learned, we've developed skill further as we've spent time in the profession. Our clients need to trust us because they don't have the same level of expertise, right? It's like when I go to the neurosurgeon and say, give me some brain surgery, what do you think? Am I going to know what he tells me back? Well, I've checked his reputation. There's only so much I can do to find out about that. So same thing with our clients. They come for a divorce, if they come for an estate plan, if they're criminal defendants, or if you're the prosecutor, that's very important that they have to trust you. So that means what? We need to be trustworthy in response to that, right? That's why we really are functioning as fiduciaries, and so we turn to each other within this peer universe to say we have to help each other and keep each other honest, and that's the prototype, that's the paradigm. So if that's what a professional does or is, then we need to think professionalism to me means something broader than ethics. It means some things about what we aspire to do. It means more than technical compliance. It means something about the spirit of what we're up to. The McCrae Commission report, Phoebe, were you on that committee? Okay, see, we do go back a ways. Very important, you may remember Bob McCrae was the president of the ABA, excellent lawyer, Sullivan Cromwell. He convened a very hardworking, really talented group that said, what's the relation between the profession and law schools? And they came up with a very thoughtfully articulated set of skills at some length and values. So the position of that group, I imagine, including Phoebe, was, yes, there's certain skill type things you have to do, but there's also core values that go with this. And I think the thing that hurt me most about McCrae was that report said it's a continuum. That was 1986. I think that was 1992, I'm sorry. Yeah, I was going to say that's right. That to me is very important because since then, now we're nearly 25 years on, I think we've had much, to the law schools at least, we've had much more pushback from the practicing bar, talking about billable practices not being available in a lot of places to do mentoring, wanting law schools to do everything and to pop new students out like biscuits from the oven or something, fully cooked and ready to be eaten. And that's just, there's some things you can't, I mean, you can't learn how to ride a bicycle from a book. That's one of the things I really believe. So I think the profession, I think that's an economic reality kind of from the things foreshadowed in the mid-'80s, but that too tells us something about values that I think bears on professionalism because it's more than just follow the rules. And then Neil Hamilton, a piece of his that I distributed that I'll touch on but not like read it to you because I think he has a whole body of work. He's at St. Thomas in Minnesota. Before he was there, this will interest maybe the faculty most of all, he had written a book called Academic Ethics. Do you know this, Phoebe? I should send it to you and others who may be interested. He did in conjunction with the AUP, Association of American University Professors, and again, this may really interest you. The structure of it is to talk about why it is we enjoy academic freedom, but most of all to me, it's got a series of scenarios in it about what is the role of the faculty vis-a-vis this situation with a student, or faculty are asked to do a curriculum reform and they never get around to it, so what's the chancellor supposed to do? And I hope you don't have that experience, Phoebe, but in any event, he really has thought about the academic profession, so you need to read his work with that in mind. But St. Thomas is a religiously affiliated school, and I think for some of this reading you might do around this area, it may well be easier for religiously affiliated schools or for schools that are newly conceived and newly out in the community to have a grip on what they're trying to do, what is the profession they're preparing people for, and that kind of thing. But for those of us, as I said, teaching in other institutions that function as trustees, we need to be thinking about this as well. And he's stated in an article I didn't give you, having to do with what do we mean by professionalism, that it's something about paying attention to our conscience, paying attention to not only duty but aspiration, also accountability, being aware that you have to balance your own self-interest against the client and society's interest, and that you're committed to think and reflect and not just be reflexive, and to engage in pro bono work. So I think that's not a bad definition of what professionalism is about, although Ray and I also talked about this. Some people would say professionalism is just about civility. I was telling him a story back in the day when I was dean from 89 to 99. I'd be out talking to alumni and they would be talking professionalism back, so I did a very rough and ready survey to say what are the problems you put under the umbrella of professionalism, and the younger lawyers said, oh, the senior lawyers, they don't answer my phone calls, and the senior lawyers said they don't wear the right clothes, and they don't act proper, they don't hold the door for me or whatever. And the judges said it's about the youngsters not doing their job right and not enough mentoring. And the litigators said the judges aren't keeping decorum in the courtroom. So it's all about it's their fault, it's their fault. So part of what I did was to create a set of scenarios to go and do CLEs to say, well, whose job is this? And usually it's everybody's job. So anyway, that's my first point. Ethics is related to professionalism. Now, professionalism influences professional identity. Here's where I get to talk a bit about the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching and their book called Educating Lawyers. If you aren't familiar with it, talk to me. I'll send you a short version so you don't have to shell out the big bucks to buy the book if you don't want it. But this was a time, something I worked on from 1999 to 2001. The book itself was published in 2007. The Carnegie Foundation at that point was led by Lee Shulman, an enormously smart and very principled guy. Among other things, he grew up in Chicago. I think his father had a deli. He learned from Benjamin Bloom, who some of you who studied education may know was in charge of a fascinating assessment project at that time in history in the 50s. A lot of the liberal arts schools, some of you who've gone to like Chicago may know this, they used to have like comprehensive exams, equivalent of our bar exam at the end of your 4 years of undergrad school. So what Bloom was charged with doing is he went and talked to people at all different disciplines to see what kind of questions should be on this exam. And what he found out was there really are a number of common tasks, educational tasks that people expect of those who know how to think critically. And these are comprehension, meaning you understand it, you can tell it back to me, analysis, meaning you can take it apart, application, synthesis, meaning you can put it together, and then evaluation. And what I showed Lee and told the other people at the foundation when they came out on field work with me was, that's thinking like a lawyer. That's what we do every day in the first year. And Lee said to me after seeing this, he said, nobody else in the academy could possibly not be proud and like awestruck that you folks can advance basically in one semester, 1 year, take people from a place in any given discipline where they may be at the comprehension stage and move them up this set of ideas about sophisticated critical thinking, which I found very interesting. Lee's own background was he's had lifelong dedication to teacher education, K through 12 teaching, and he'd also worked with Michigan State when they were developing a problem-based medical education protocol. So he was really very creative. He also was in charge of the foundation at the point when they had their centennial, when they were 100 years old from the time that Andrew Carnegie, the steel baron, who some of you from parts of Pennsylvania probably saw the artifacts of his time on Earth. So Lee said, let's see what we can learn from, as Donald said, looking comparatively at professions, not just one, but several, the same way that at the outset of the foundation they had done. So they did. They chose clergy, engineering, law, nursing, and medicine, and this whole process was very illuminating because they developed a framing, which I'll briefly touch on, that cut across these different fields, and the studies that I just mentioned also were able to ring chimes and tell people. That's why this wasn't published till 2007, because they wanted to have done the field work about engineering and clergy and some of the other things, so they could say to those of us in legal education, here's how somebody else approaches this, say in medical education or engineering or particularly clergy. So what are you doing about that in that framing as we've tried to make it accessible to you, which I think was a very worthy undertaking. Other things of note, again, I had a much longer slide that I took out here to save time, but that Lee had the wisdom to have everybody working there at the time, including me, think about were, what is it that professionals do across the whole spectrum of fields that I just talked about? That is, not only what lawyers do, but in some way, how do you articulate that in a way that explains what they do, medicine, nursing, clergy, and engineering. Could you possibly depict all those professions in a way that shows you what the underlying tasks are or fundamental intellectual endeavors are with all those fields? So how many do you think that couldn't be done? How many think it could be done? How many don't care? Okay, how many don't know? Okay, well, so what were they? First was a learning base out of academia. Second thing, which I love to talk to my first years about, is dealing with uncertainty. So I'm going to let that sink in for a moment, because that is dreadfully hard for people coming out of undergrad or out of master's programs who then want to go on to law school. But the reality is a lot of what we do is, as lawyers, dealing with uncertainty, things that don't have an answer in the book, where you're having to basically construct knowledge, make arguments, deal with kind of the vacuum there, because there isn't a formal answer that's been nailed down, or even if there is an answer from 20 years ago, maybe that's not the answer anymore because there's a statute or society's moved on or other jurisdictions have a better approach to this or whatever it is. That is a hard thing to ask of students. It's basically forcing them, without their request and against their instincts, to give up the security of, I'm an A student, I know everything that they've lived with for years and years, and to tell them, put that away, that isn't how the world works. We're going to open your brain and make you have a new epistemology, a new theory of learning and knowledge, and you're not going to like that, but let me tell you, it's a lot of fun if you get past the first couple of bumps. That's what I test on in first year. That's why I give them essays. That's why I say to them, you know, if you see something you don't know the answer to, you should feel very lucky, because that means you found the Easter egg or the strawberry, and now tell me why it's difficult. Tell me what the possible responses are. If you haven't seen anything difficult, you're not paying attention. If you haven't seen something that's uncertain. But isn't that the truth of it across all these different fields? That's a very elemental thing. I find that very helpful to articulate that. And I think it traces back to what we do well, because when we do this kind of dance with Bloom's taxonomy, we're really working them through those changes. It's like chimes. Other things he said that we said that underlie Carnegie, practice in a context that's complicated. Another thing is learning, continually learning. I think we would appreciate that. In addition, he framed it in terms of a professional community being able to be involved and engage in a professional community. And I think some of what we do tends to be solo focus, as opposed to, I think the woman with gray hair kind of next to back table, I'm sorry I forget your name, but you said something about impaired lawyers. That's really the truth of it. We're not just alone in this. We have some obligation to each other and giving service. So that's the frame, I think a very good frame. And then the next point would be, if that's what the professions are fundamentally doing, are the professional schools preparing people to do that, or are they totally divorced from that? And I tend, when I've gone around the country, to say, well, a lot of people might say, I don't care about that because I'm an academic and I can just focus on what I choose, and I've got tenure, so there, and I've got a parking place, so double, so there, and I've got a corner office, so don't dare you take it away from me. Academics, is this true? Yeah, okay. Let's be honest here, okay. But the point is, let's think about the commonalities across both professions writ large and what the role of schools are vis-a-vis the actual reality of professions, and think about how that implicates what you're doing in school. Second very useful framing is to say, metaphorically, there are three principal apprenticeships that are there in each of these professional fields. One is, to use fancy terms, cognitive apprenticeship, meaning I'm apprenticing you, my students, to tell me what's in your head so I can tell you if it matches what's in my head. The terminology came from somebody doing very brilliant computer thinker from, I think, an IBM think tank. But I think you know what I mean when I say cognitive apprenticeship. It includes, for me, I've mapped it out in more detail and some other things I've written to say it includes some of the things we talked about this morning, being able to know the vocabulary, being able to read well and closely, being able to know who the players are, being able to critique what's going on. Now, a lot of that is what we do in first year. But in addition to that, the cognitive, separate that from substance, from content, to recognize that's really about how your mind is working. Skills or practice, and then values and identity. So I'm moving toward the identity part. And to use a term typically used in clergy, formation, which I'll come back to here in a moment, that basically integrates all these things. Teaching and learning matters. That's another thing that, oh yeah, we know teaching matters, and we know that students, whether students learn matters, or we give lip service to that. The whole point of the new ABA requirements about learning outcomes is get your eyes not just on you're the sage on the stage and you feel good about yourself most days. It's about what did the students learn and can you show it. Two real points there. There's been a lot of work on learning. There's a wonderful free, let me emphasize free, book called How People Learn on the National Academy Press website, nat.edu, I think. You can download the whole thing for free. For any of you who find this interesting, or especially if you have kids, but it distills, the guy who was the lead writer is John Bransford, who's on the Vanderbilt Education School faculty. It considers things like how learning transfers. If I teach this in property, will students remember it when they get to T&E or family law? It considers expertise theory, which I think is very important, and most of us are not aware of that. Some of you may have read the Malcolm Gladwell book, blanking on the name of which was which there, but he looks at hockey players. You're too far south to care about hockey, right? No, okay, good. Thank you. Stand up for yourselves. His point, a very interesting point, was the way the school-age hockey stuff worked in Canada meant that depending on when you were born and what grade you were in, you either were burly enough to start doing that, then you'd end up possibly as a pro hockey player, or if you were in the group of, I was born August 31st, so I'm in the next entry class to kindergarten instead of the one, if I'd been born September 2nd, I'd be in this one, that really affects things. Now, why would that affect things all the way up to when you're playing pro hockey? Well, part of it was, and I think this is right, to be an expert in anything you need, some people would say 10,000 hours of practice. Is that if you're a violin expert, if you're a skateboarder, if you're a hockey player, if you're an artist, whatever. But the point about that is expertise. One of the things that sets apart novices from beginners from expertise, it's not that novices should be blamed, it's just they haven't had the number of chess matches or the amount of music practice under their belts to allow them to develop expertise. And what is the problem with some of our students? For some of our students, they don't get the fact that they need to practice working scenarios all the time throughout the first semester. When they get to the exam, if they're savvy, they will have played chimes around some scenarios that in fact will end up on the exam, right? Same thing with the bar exam. Have you spent enough time letting the simmering pot of civil procedure knowledge really get into your gut so that you don't have to actively, it's really interesting because it's about how your brain works. You won't have to actively say, brain, where is this file? It's like it'll rise to the top without your asking because it's such deep knowledge that you've got it. So some of that stuff, really very interesting. We weren't ever taught that as lawyers or law professors, but it's out there and I commend it to you. I think expertise is what I test on my essay exams. That's why I don't use multiple choice, one of the reasons, because I don't care so much about content. They need some content, but I'm trying to test, are they problem solvers against a scenario? And I tell them that, which helps them feel a little better, but they still may not practice enough to really do well. Other thing, and this is probably for those of us who are teachers, that's very interesting. Did you know that every of these different professional education programs has a different, what Lady Shulman would call signature pedagogy? That means the approach to teaching in that field would differ. So what is it for us? I call it case dialogue method because it's not really Socratic. It's more about dialogue, and it's typically about cases. That's the first year. And if you read some stuff I've written in a, pardon the expression, Rutgers Newark law journal a couple of years ago, I go into that in some depth, and I even quote Paper Chase. Paper Chase. You remember the Kingsfield dance with whoever he was dancing with? Well, I think it was the Harry Hand case, if you remember what that was. But he's really doing this dance, and what were the facts of this? If you go back to it, you can see that dance is all about Bloom's taxonomy, that you're getting out all those different notions. There'll be a new hypothetical. It's really about, can you apply this? But the thing is, with the case dialogue method, we really love it. That's our signature pedagogy. Everybody, I went to 16 law schools. The 2 in Canada tended to use more lecture. 14 very different law schools in the US. Everybody with differences in the details was doing first-year courses that we sat in on. They were doing some version of Socratic, not necessarily classic. There's a wonderful teacher at Texas who really did, a lovely duet with a student going through the Kingsfield moves. If you remember Kingsfield, John Houseman, wherever he is today, we salute you. Other places, more diverse places, New Mexico, because for each of these areas we tried to pair 2 quite different schools in the same region. And I would do 2 site visits a week. I was younger and dumber then. I probably still do it today. But at the point, you would see what's different about New Mexico versus Texas. New Mexico is a very different student body. Many Native Americans, many first-generation college, let alone law school folks, very different experiential packages coming into law school. So there it was much more, instead of I'm going to drill you the whole class, which might happen at Texas, it was, so tell me this, tell me this, tell me this, tell me this. So it would be expertise coming from a lot of different people to try to build this dynamic within the whole class, but it was still case dialogue, which was very, very interesting. Point is, if you do case dialogue, what are you teaching implicitly? Explicitly, too. You're teaching Bloom's taxonomy. I just told you that. Did you get that? Bloom's taxonomy. Write it down. Donald. Okay. But B-L-O-O-M. Bloom's, as in Bloomsday or Bloomsbury or whatever. As in Dr. Bloom from Chicago. Benjamin. Makes me think of Mrs. Robinson. Plastics. Okay. Some of you still know that. Okay, well, that's good. Some of you never heard of this. Okay, we'll tell you the secret later. Okay, but the point is, if I really care about teaching ethics and dealing with professional identity with students, am I easily going to fall into that if I'm doing the dance of analytical, tell me what was there, what facts, what theory, apply it, synthesize these cases? Am I going to get to ethics or professionalism? No. How many agree with that? It's not that you can't, it's if you don't realize about this, every signature pedagogy across these different fields, for every strength that's there, there's like a pocket of stuff left out. So we're really good at doing the cognitive to develop the critical thinking very well, but if you really want to probe, like, is there justice here? I'd have to tell you this was one of the most sobering things. 16 law schools, how many times do you think I heard somebody say justice in a classroom? Yeah, once or twice. This is after how many, do you believe that, Phoebe? It wasn't at your school.
No.
It wasn't here, so. Well, but that, I think that just proves the point that how many times did you see somebody talking about fact development or cultural issues, cultural competence, like zero. And that's the truth of it. And yeah, that was in 2000, not 2015, and that was, but where did I see it? In Canada, which was very interesting, because Canadian casebooks and the training of Canadian faculty, many more of them were social science PhDs as well as lawyers, so they also, very interesting, they had their own casebook or textbook protocol. They didn't have West and what's now Lexis, Matthew Bender, whatever, Foundation Press, Aspen. Those publishers had dominated the market, so it was faculty developing their prototype and then sharing it with others. There's also many, many fewer law schools in Canada, but that was missing. And why is that? I think it's about signature pedagogy, not realizing that it's not everything. If you want to do those other things, you have to supplement your materials or your approach to things. And thankfully now, I find this very exciting that the publishers are getting it. I'm teaching property this spring, and I'm going to use a good casebook by Spragley, but I'm going to use a supplement by some folks for Lexis that gives me a chance to have actual skill development kinds of things with it. So without that, I might not have the time, you know, to develop my own set of fact patterns. You're going to negotiate this, or you're going to do this debate about that, or you're going to interview a client. Somebody took the time to do that. Now I can have it off the shelf. So I think that's another output from Carnegie that is pretty interesting. Boy, time flies. The better Donald told me this is what would happen. So, okay, so briefly, what did Carnegie mean by professional identity? It meant ethics. We went to ethics PR courses at every 16 schools, but it means other things too. Social roles, responsibilities, the importance of the profession, morality and character, things about lawyers, responsibilities, but also the ultimate purpose of the profession, talking overtly about that morality and character, and putting that all together, a chance to help students see how the professional identity that they're developing is going to ultimately interface and be integrated with their personal identity if they're going to be happy in the profession. Professional formation, as I said, pulls it all together, and one of my favorite ways to explain this, how many of you have been in 4-H? Oh, okay, thank you. You're an urban group, I see. Go to your state fair if you haven't, and say nice things to the students who bring their favorite potatoes or tomatoes or rabbits or whatever. I pledge my head, my hands, right, my heart, my health. Isn't that thinking, doing, believing, putting it together? So is this out of nowhere? I don't think so. I think it resonates pretty well with the rest of what's important here. Questions for you. To students, how has law school affected your sense of justice and morality? To faculty, what should law professors and law schools do to address this? To practitioners, what role do members of the profession play in trying to develop these points of view and attitudes? What do you think we saw? Well, we saw some interesting things. I think I pulled that slide out. We saw faculty saying, that's not my job. I'm not a trained philosopher. I don't believe we should have to train people in character because they come here as adults, and that's their job, not my job. What we heard from students is, I've learned that thinking like a lawyer means you're not supposed to pay attention or talk about ethics. You're not supposed to care about justice. I've taken criminal law and I'm told that's the wrong stuff to talk about. Don't put it on the exam. Do you believe that? Yeah. Okay, why does it matter? Let me try to go swiftly along here. I put forth, I think I'll skip the detail of this, but I put forth 4 propositions that I previewed before. If stronger professional identity can make a difference in engaging lawyers with ethical issues, well, let's get on with it, because if that's the starting point in a way of creating a point of view that looks at professionalism and ethics, 5 minutes, he says. 2 minutes, he says. Question and answer. I'll wind it up here. That's important, and given that we're at a time when the student population is changing, when the profession is changing, if we don't pay attention to this, who's going to do that? There's not the same mentoring going on. Stronger professional identity, documented by Hamilton's work, can help lawyers be more effective, better lawyers. Don't we care about that? Stronger professional identity can help lawyers be happier and less depressed. I had a research semester in Australia, spring of 2013. They literally put self-management, including working on depression and things like that, as one of their nationally framed learning outcomes for law schools in Australia. Pretty radical, right? What do? We hide it away. People sort of ashamed. Maybe there's someone they are told they could talk to at the law school, maybe not. Maybe they're supposed to go to counseling somewhere. They wonder if they're not going to make it through the bar. Developing stronger professional identity early on can help individual lawyers to build a more professional, broad-based bar. So I'm not going to take you through the details of that, but the next question, which I'm not going to address since Donald gave me the hook here, is, so what do we do about all this? And that's really what I wanted to bring to you and put in front of you in a good place to move to questions and answers. Do you believe there is such a thing as professional identity? How many of you say yes? How many of you say no? How many of you don't know? Good, thank you, that's honest. So if there is, and if it matters, how many of you think now it does matter? How many of you don't? It's okay if you disagree, okay. But say you believe it exists and believe that it matters, what are we going to do about it? And what's here at the end of the day is, Carnegie would say there's a lot of point of contact where you can think about in clinics, which often, I teach clinical stuff too, often people will say that's really where you're dealing with identity because that's where students are going to interact with clients. But that's not the only place. Pro bono programs, teachers as role models, I mean, there's a lot of that available. The bar can do many a thing here as well, but I'll leave you with these slides and you have them in front of you to see what the final conclusions are. I hope that was that interesting. I hope it was. So comments, questions, observations?
I just have to, since this is ethics, I was not on the McCrae Commission. I
Oh.
was on the 20-year after.
Okay, thank you.
Committee of the AALS.
Well, you're so young, Phoebe. I think anybody who was on that commission is... Okay, well, thank you. But the 20-year commission, does this still resonate?
Yeah, it
Okay.
does, yeah.
Who else has a comment? Yes.
I'm so interested in all of this, and I'm sorry you didn't have time to do the entire
Well, this was the short version. You should have seen the long version.
Well, I think this is fascinating stuff. So I just want to throw out a couple of small things that I do in my constitutional litigation class, which is a simulation-based class that integrates teaching of doctrine and skills. And as you say, it uses a textbook that has lots and lots of practice skills built into it. Context and practice series, which is like the LexisNexis, and yes, it was expressly motivated by the Carnegie report. I wrote it, so I know that that's the motivation.
Hats up to you.
But so some of the things I've struggled with professional identity. How do I integrate that into what I teach? And I'm just going to throw out two things, and I'm going to ask you for suggestions, anything else that I might do. But two things that I do right now is, well, it's based on simulations, but I have 3 panels of lawyers come in. One panel is plaintiffs, civil rights lawyers. One panel is civil rights defense lawyers, either representing small towns or bigger cities like Philadelphia. And the third one is sort of lawyers who are involved in shaping civil rights issues but not expressly representing clients. So like the head of the police advisory commission, Women's Law Project.
I'd say that's terrific. That you're giving role models so that they can see that people have put it all together. I don't think you have to give these folks ethics scenarios to deal with, but I think the very fact that they speak, they'll tell you things that you want to hear. It makes me think too of a good reading, I think, for anybody not specific to your case, but it's by folks, I can't remember where, but it's called Mistakes I've Made Some. I could send it to you, but it's a very interesting piece by a senior faculty member talking about what he says to students, recognize that mistakes are part of the process, and you may get into that too, but I'd say that's great. Many of the core courses now have available companion books on like property stories or family law stories that let somebody see the context and the lawyering behind the screen. So I think that, or some people occasionally show movies. A civil action, there's for Civ Pro people, there's pretty extensive, basically document file that you could use to engage about civil procedure. Other comments, questions? To the lawyers in the group, I think I still have the podium for 4 more minutes. Does this stuff ring true to you all? Do you think, my bet is you have strong senses of professional identity or you wouldn't be here. And that you probably, many of you who see Donald, he's probably imprinted you in some way with his sense of what a lawyer is, because he's a real lawyer as well as a real academic at heart, I think. Does this ring true to you? Any of you real lawyers out there? You're not used to being called on anymore, so you got to consent with that. Yes?
I think I can probably be heard without the microphone. I think I was not a litigator, I was a business practice. And one of our major expressions of profession is negotiation. I think one interesting area of our responsibility is in negotiation of transaction. Is it permitted to mislead the other side in negotiations? That's a difficult question. And I think easily people would split on that issue for a number of reasons. The other, which I find particularly fascinating, is one of our ethical responsibilities, is to bring to the attention of appropriate tribunals some type of unethical behavior by another lawyer. That is a very hard set of facts to address. It represents so many different elements of an accusation. Even when one clearly identifies an inappropriate area of practice. I think those are two difficult areas of decision.
Well, I'd say on the second of those, many people, I'm sure many of you in the room have had the conversation, where were the lawyers with VW? You talked about that. My hunch is the engineers didn't tell the lawyers. But on the other hand, did the lawyers create a culture where this kind of hiding things out was acceptable? Could they have done anything to see things coming? Different question you're addressing, but kind of in the ballpark. Other comments?
I just wanted to mention, so two other areas where I see professional identity sort of coming into discussions with students. One is, I think a lot of that actually happens not in classroom.
Right.
But a lot of where I think of myself having
Right.
those conversations with students are individual conversations.
Well, and maybe in extracurriculars too. I think in some way the growth of extracurriculars shows they're hungry for this and they're taking it outside the classroom.
Right. The other thing I was going to say is when I've done counseling exercises for students in class, that seems to open up a space to talk about these issues in a way that the usual case pedagogy doesn't, because there's such a broader range of considerations in counseling a client.
Well, and that's very interesting as you think about where do we put this in the extracurricular or curricular context. My sense is, my rule of thumb is, if everybody, I mean, this is, Donald would say this is the pervasive method, and some people think, why bother, it's not going to work. But I think if they have a solid professional responsibility course, and then it's echoed in different ways, so that you raise that in a setting, I think particularly in response to both these comments, I think of the rules, model rules, it's really having been built in a lot of ways on a litigation frame without having fleshed out some of the transactional dimensions to this, and I think too the counseling interviewing is where students can feel like their humanity still has a place, which I think is probably good, so it hasn't been beaten out of them in that setting.
And also, I mean, I usually do them when they're counseling their corporate client, but I think there's space there too for thinking about what are the realm of considerations that might be very different than in the litigation.
Okay. Other comments? Yes.
I think one,
This isn't going to reach your eye.
I think one of the possibilities that your kind of circular professional identity, professionalism, ethics model seems to leave out is that some of us actually have a professional identity that's deeply wedded to a personal identity.
Right.
And quite frankly, it is the personal identity that informs
Right,
our
absolutely.
selection of this profession
Right.
because of our desire to promote justice, to be of service, right, to be truth-seeking, and
Right.
to promote integrity.
Right.
And so that has really been foundational to our own personal
Right.
identity and therefore drives our selection of this particular profession because it resonates.
That's absolutely right, and I'm sorry my diagram was more to get the terminologies straight, but I think that's one of the hardest and most significant things that I say to students is, who are you? What matters to you? You should choose a place in the career that resonates with that, because if you don't, you'll be very unhappy. And you won't have the sense of alignment and integrity in your life if you're putting on a different hat when you go to work compared to who you are.
And I think that for people then that did not choose the profession for those reasons, there's a misalignment, right, between those
Right.
values and their professional identity.
Well, and that's also a very interesting point. I think if there isn't at the outset an alignment, I think there's still a question to ask them. If you want to be happy, you got to think about an alignment. And that there's a range of places you can stand in the profession. Maybe you go be a foreclosure bad bear, take away people's houses. Because, well, seriously, if you have a strong law and order kind of orientation and say they should pay their debts or whatever, maybe that's your worldview. Wouldn't be my worldview, but that's one of the answers to the faculty skepticism about, I don't want to force somebody to adopt my values. The answer to that typically would be, I'm not making you change your personal values. I want you to see within the profession where happiness lies, and you can think about that, but it doesn't mean you have to adopt mine. So let me say again, thank you to my friend Donald and to all of you for being here.
Let me just finish with a couple things. First, Judith, thank you so much. The only problem with Judith is she could go on for another 2 hours and you still wouldn't learn half or a quarter or whatever. She just is a fount of knowledge. But thank you for the breadth of history, the view of the profession, the ethics, the values of the profession. Ultimately, I think you've led us to ask more questions about ourselves and our profession. How do we want to practice law? How do we want to live our lives? Now indulge me one more second. 3 people are here that I didn't acknowledge in the beginning. My former partner, mentor for 45 years, Bernard Shannon, and 2 of the deans, 2 of the 3 deans that made my career, my second career, happen. Ray, please stand up. Peter, Glenn, please stand up. Thank you so much. Thank you all. We stand adjourned.
I just got back.